A prominent former Jayhawk compared Samis Calderon to Brandon Rush. We're going to get into that in addition to Lucas Smalls-Allen, a really good defensive line commit, adding to the KU class of 2026, and a little financial news as KU may be surpassing K-State in a big way.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day, and thank you to the everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of LOJ, we're talking a little Samis Calderon. What could he bring to the table for this Kansas team? Kind of one of those wild cards of where he's going to fit in. Is he going to be the rotation? Is he going to be outside? Well, there were some comparisons made from a former prominent Jayhawk comparing him to a player who has his jersey hanging in the rafters in Allen Fieldhouse. So that would certainly speak to him being a possible player right away for KU. We'll also get into a little KU football talk as Lucas Smalls-Allen, a 2026 recruit, has committed to the Jayhawks, adding to that really good class from KU standards. And then we'll finish up with a little bit of the latest news, where some players are going in the NBA, and also a little financial stuff between KU and K-State. Today's episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. And right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Do that over with FanDuel. All right, we're going to get started with Samis Calderon. So Samis Calderon is the 6'8", 200-pound forward. I think he's somebody who can, play the 3 or the 4. There have been some places that list him as having like a 7'2" wingspan, which I guess theoretically you could play him as, like, if you wanted to play a really small ball 5 lineup where he was the small ball 5 and just have he's bigger than KJ was, and KJ was playing the 5, right? I don't think that's what KU ever wants to do, but, in a pinch, it's like, oh, what if Bryson Tiller is injured and Flory gets in foul trouble and then Paul Mbia gets in foul trouble? It's like, okay, well, you would be the next guy up. But I think for the most part, he's a 3-4, and I think in an ideal world, he is the perfect college 4, right? He's a really good athlete at 6'8", who can athletically keep up if teams are playing smaller with guards on the wings, but also he has the length that he can play like a real big, like a power forward in there. He's originally from Brazil. He's a bit older for his class, so he's 20 years old right now, and that is where maybe some hesitations coming into the season of like, okay, what is he going to bring to the table? Because this is a kid who, he's not a McDonald's All-American. He's not a top 30 recruit in the class. He is somebody who has really good tools and athleticism and length, but also this was a player who was on the worst team in overtime elite. They went just 3-17 this year, though they did, upset the first round opponent, which it seeded. The 4 seed plays the 8 seed, so it's kind of weird, but they made the semifinals, right? And the stats are fine for Calderon, but, it's not like ultra efficient, and it's not something that like jumps off the page. It's 26% from 3. So like you look at it across the board, and it's an interesting player, one that I think makes sense for the staff to take a gamble on, because the athleticism like this could turn into something. But I think because of those things, you kind of get into a situation where it's like, well, maybe he could be part of the rotation, right? Seems like he's doing pretty well in the offseason, and because Kansas is a little lighter on having, wing type players, 3-4 type players, it would make some sense if you were to be a part of the rotation at the end of the day, right? At the same point in time, if he is a little bit more raw, it does make you wonder, okay, is he going to be on the outside looking in of a guy like Cole Rosario, who Cole Rosario, for instance, was in the same OTE, put up better stats than Calderon, and was on a more winning team. So like, where does that factor in, for instance, right? But this comp that was made by one Wayne Simeon is certainly going to add to the hype train for Samis Calderon. So Wayne Simeon, obviously former All-American at the University of Kansas, jersey hanging in the rafters, former first-round draft pick of the Miami Heat, had a money-making career in the NBA, and now he has been a part of the staff with KU. And that's the important part, that he is, I think now his official title, I think it changed. I forget what for a while he was like team chaplain, and he's done all sorts of things around the program. Now he's associate athletic director, right? So this is somebody who is clearly around the basketball program. This is somebody who, I don't think that he's not just doing this just because he thinks this is going to be the case. I'm sure he's been around practice. I'm sure he has watched some or all of the practices so far. And this is what he tweeted out. It was in response to an interview with Samis Calderon and Greg Gurley on a video. And he responded to it and said, "I am really excited about Samis. Reminds me of Brandon Rush." Now, this is, I think, a couple things, right? it certainly is going to add to the hype train of Samis. And if he is anything close to what Brandon Rush was at Kansas, that would be a great player for KU. You also add to it that Brandon Rush was like a stud for Kansas right away as a freshman. So does that get the idea that like, oh, he could be a stud right away for Kansas? It's also a unique one too, because like in none of my wildest dreams did I think, okay, and I've seen highlights of Samis Calderon. I haven't seen, I'm not watching full games of OTE, right? I am not envisioning Samis Calderon as the archetype of Brandon Rush. You think of Brandon Rush as this like smooth player who's a good athlete, right? Who's just this knockdown shooter, just a pure scorer, really good defender. And from Calderon, I think of more of this like, athletic marvel who is more of like a power athlete, whereas Rusher's more of kind of that smooth athlete. And I don't think of the 3-point shooting. Again, like you look at Calderon in the regular season for OTE, he shot 26% on 3-point shots. He shot 67% from the free throw line. That doesn't give me Brandon Rush vibes. I also look at what he did at OTE. He was averaging, again, in the regular season, 8.4 points per game and 2.7 assists per game, 5.5 rebounds per game. 8.4 points per game in OTE, whereas B. Rush is putting up like 13 points per game right away as a freshman at Kansas. So there are parts of it that I'm like, I don't know if I totally buy that comparison, but here's where that's very exciting. If he is seeing that, what that is telling me is that his athleticism does look smooth. And we knew he was a good athlete, but there is that different level of being maybe more of a herky-jerky athlete and a smooth one. So that would be a good sign. What that really tells me is that he is shooting the ball well in practice so far. Now, is that going to hold up over the long haul? Is that something where he's just at a hot month or so? I don't know. But if you're doing it every day in practice, you're probably getting more shots up in practice than you are in a game, or in the regular season when you're playing. So that is encouraging that maybe the shot is coming around, because that's the big thing. If Samis Calderon can even be a 30, Jalen Wilson was playing the 4 on the national title team, and the year they won the title, he was shooting like 26% from 3-point range. It is a little bit more about, are they respecting you and guarding it, at least a little bit. And there were teams that sagged off Jalen Wilson that year, but it wasn't like a full sag off. It was like, we're going to sag off a little more than normal, but still be there. Whereas with like when KJ Adams is in at the 4, it's like, we're going to fully sag off, right? There's a little bit of a nuance in between there. And so that is important for Samis Calderon, but it's also interesting because I think of Rush as more of the NBA, he was a shooting guard. For Kansas, he mostly played the 3 because they're using multiple ball handlers. Whereas with Calderon, I view him more as a 3-4. So again, I think kind of a unique one, but it has to be encouraging. At the same point in time, and different people saying this, right? But I just go back to last offseason and at the banquet, Bill Self said Zach Clements was the most improved player for KU. And I know he had an injury he had to deal with this season, but like that didn't bear the fruits of it labor into the regular season. So I'm not just going to go ahead and sit here and go, okay, well, Samis Calderon is Brandon Rush. He's going to be the best player on the team, and he's going to start from day one, or the second best player on the team to Darren Peterson, or third, whatever you want to say with Flory, right? I'm not ready to get to that point. Does it inch me closer to being like, okay, maybe Calderon, does he have a leg up for the final rotation spot, right? Because if you're looking at it from a standpoint of even if it's a 50th percentile outcome for Calderon is 50% of what B. Rush was right away as a freshman, that probably plays in the rotation, right? And you look at the roster for KU with the, I guess I would say like the 4 main guards, Marco Jackson, Melvin Council, Jaden Dawson, and Darren Peterson. Those guys are going to be in the rotation. Flory Badunga plus backup center. Let's say it's Paul Mbia. Maybe it ends up being Bryson Tiller, right? Who's more of a 4-5, but let's just say backup center, right? That's 6 guys that you're looking at right there. And then Trey White on the wing, right? Who's probably going to be your starter at the 4. So that's 7 guys. So you basically have one more spot left in the rotation. Does that go to a Bryson Tiller, where maybe you play a little bit too big basketball, where he can play the 4 or the 5? Does it go to Cole Rosario, who, again, same league as Samis Calderon, better stats on a better team? Or does it go to Calderon? And maybe, too, like there is something to the idea of, okay, maybe this Calderon kid was a raw prospect who just needs to be refined, and maybe the tools are there. And maybe that situation, I mentioned this before, OT isn't always the most organized setting for basketball, right? And so maybe Calderon goes to what ended up having the worst record in OTE. And yes, you could hold that against him and say maybe he's not impacting winning. Maybe it's also possible that he just went to an organized team in kind of an unorganized league that has weird rules. Like they have like power plays that happen where you get like a 5-on-4 if like something happens with it. It's a weird league. Point being, you get Samis Calderon with, and I don't know for sure. For all I know, he did have a really good coach, right? He did have a good developmental coach that didn't care about wins, losses, and that's why they went 3-17 and they were just developing players. I have no idea. but you get a player like that who's molded and sculpted and looks like an Adonis, and you get him in a structured system, even though maybe he is a little bit older. I mean, players still improve in the NBA when they're 22, 23, 24, right? That you get him with Bill Self, you get him in a structured system, you get him on campus where he can go in and take shots. I don't know. Maybe it is different. Maybe the sky is the limit, right? And maybe this is the breakout season for Samis Calderon, because some guys, they break out between their sophomore and junior years, and that would be the age range that Samis Calderon is realistically in. So I'm not going to fully buy into that he is the next coming of Brandon Rush, but it does at least cue my interest a little bit more to the idea that maybe he has the advantage for that final rotation spot for KU, at least for the time being. And if we're continuing on with the comparisons of this roster and how Bill Self has built it, similar to the 2019-20 roster, I think he'd kind of be that Tristan Enaruna role for KU. And you might not remember Tristan Enaruna playing like a huge role for KU, and he wasn't, but he was playing, 11 minutes per game for 30 games on that 19-20 season. You might not remember that. 11 minutes per game. So maybe it's that type of role for KU where he can kind of play the 3-4 mostly as a 4 and give you a flexible, versatile type of forward. So at least an interesting quote there from Wayne Simeon, or tweet, I guess. All right, KU football got another recruit in Lucas Smalls Allen. Let's break him down next. This episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, which the Open's coming up, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel's the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. And you can even get early college football futures or NFL futures. You think Mahomes is going to win MVP? Jalen Daniels is going to win Heisman, or KU football is going to go over 7.5 wins? Do that right now at FanDuel. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks, and little KU football talk here on the show is Lucas Smalls Allen is the latest commit for Lance Leipold and the class. So Smalls Allen posted this to Twitter. I think this was Friday. I'm excited to announce that I'm committed to the University of Kansas, and then all sorts of tags, hashtags, cool little graphic on there, yada, yada, yada. I really like this kid in watching some of his stuff. So he is if we're talking class as a whole for KU, he's the 19th commit in the class of 2026 for the Jayhawks. And make no mistakes on the name with Smalls in the name. This is a big dude, 6'4", 270 pounds. I think another site had him at 6'3", 265. Regardless, big dude that they'll probably try to add even more weight to. He could play D tackle or D end. I think does profile more to being a D tackle, but this is something we brought up when Naquan Carter committed to Kansas, that Iowa State has been playing this 3-3-5 defense. And I mentioned that Carter is somebody that, size-wise, he's kind of a mix between, you could either put more weight on him and make him a D tackle, or if you end up playing a 3 down front defense, then maybe he's a D end and a 3 down front. And that's the same way that I feel here with this player. So who knows? Maybe KU eventually does go to that, because I mentioned Iowa State because DK McDonald, your current defensive coordinator, has ties there. Maybe it is going to be a 4-man front and he'll be a defensive tackle, but I did find that interesting. By the way, he did choose Kansas over Wake Forest in the end. That was kind of the big race at the end there. But yeah, 19 commits for Kansas in the class. In some of the recent, recruitments, I've mentioned this, where Kansas stands compared to some of their past classes in KU football history. I'll just reiterate it again. They're up to 19 commits now in the class of 2026, which just by pure volume, that would be the biggest class that Lance Leipold has brought in at Kansas. They have 4 top 500 commits. That equals the amount of top 500. This is the 24/7 composite, I should mention, for the rankings. That equals the amount of top 500 commits that KU with Leipold has gotten in his previous 4 classes at Kansas. And the 4 is the most that KU has gotten in the 24/7 sports era. It's tied with the 2010 class with Turner Gill, but that had 24 commits. It also has 9 top 800 commits in this class, which the previous high was 8 for KU, also in 2010. The high under Lance Leipold previously was 7. So they're 2 above that right now. And obviously recruiting rankings change and shift and will as these players play their senior year of high school. Top 1,000 commits. 11 of the commits are top 1,000 at this point for KU, which would currently be second most. The only time they had more was 13 back in 2011. They had 32 total commits, though, that year. So if we're talking about the percentage of your commits in a class that are top 1,000, this year's class right now for Kansas is about 58%. The previous two were over 50%. No other team before Lance Leipold, because they were also 43% in 2023, got above a 40.6%. Turner Gill was 40.6, and then there was some other ones that were 33 or in the 20s. So they're stacking up classes. They're bringing in a lot of quality. And if we're looking at players on the 24/7 composite, if we're not just talking rankings, if we're talking, grade, so because some years can be better recruiting classes than others, right? If we're just talking the score of 0.8600 or higher on the composite, 15 of the 19 commits are that. That means 79% of the class for KU are 0.8600 or higher. The previous high for Kansas is 82%. That was the class of 2024. Previous high before that was 73%, which is 2025. Previous high before that is 64%, which is 2023. All those are Lance Leipold classes. If you're talking non-Lance Leipold classes, you have to go all the way back to 2010 Turner Gill. It was only 33%. So this is an awesome class of 2026 for Kansas. I know that was a lot of info. Rewind, re-listen if you need to kind of digest that again. But when you're looking at Smalls Allen, what he brings to the table, he's from Roswell, Georgia, played at a Blessed Trinity Catholic, and 24/7 rates him as an 87 graded 3-star. He's a top 90 defensive lineman in the country. Rivals has him as a 5.53 star. So it's interesting because an 87 graded 3-star at 247, that's a bit of a higher rated 3-star. Their scale is a lot easier to remember. It's like 90 is a 4-star, right? So he's getting a little closer there. With Rivals, I want to say it's like 5.5 to 5.8 are their distinctions of 3-stars. So it's interesting the difference there. You look at him in high school, he's a multi-sport athlete, track and field. He was a state qualifier as a junior in the shot put. And he also plays football, obviously, where as a sophomore, he had 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss in more limited play. In this past season, 71 tackles, 16 tackles for loss, 10 sacks. In high school, he's actually playing defensive end. So there will be a bit of an adjustment there, but he moves really well for his size. And you can tell that immediately from pulling up the highlights, the film, whatever you want to call it. He uses the speed well to chase down, pursue quarterbacks. He does still have solid power. I think sometimes maybe plays a bit high, which, 6'3", 6'4". And again, he's mostly been a defensive end in high school. So that will be a bit of an adjustment in terms of both adding the requisite weight to play defensive tackle and also, some of the, fundamental things, footwork, hand in the ground, whatever that you might be doing that you might not be doing, the kind of crossover back and forth, but it still is a similar position. It still is defensive line. So at least, he's not moving from, defensive end to safety, right? I guess the reverse Kyron Johnson in a way. But, I got to be honest, after watching some of the highlights in the films and even, I guess, looking at the stats, I don't know the level of play he's playing in high school. Maybe that's part of it. But, I was pretty surprised in watching him that there weren't more big offers. And I do find it interesting that Wake Forest and Kansas are the ones in the end because both of those schools, whether I think of Lance Leipold, and I guess Wake Forest now has a new head coach, but previously with their other head coach, Dave Clawson, they were very much a developed program and was a program that was doing more with less, right? And I do find that interesting that those would be the schools in on. But I was surprised the ranking wasn't higher. I was surprised there weren't more offers because this dude looks good. I think everybody has their guys, so to speak. I like a lot of these recruits that the KU has brought in. Still, there's always going to be another level, and this can apply for anything, right? Everybody has their favorite players. Everybody has their guys that they think are underrated on their favorite team or on a team that maybe they watch a lot or whatever, right? It's just sports. Everybody has their guys that they think are underrated or that they think whatever. This is going to be one of my guys. If I was picking my 3 to 5 my guys, the guys that I would be willing to be yeah, they're going to turn into something at Kansas. I'll be honest, he would be in that list for me. Not that he's going to be the most impactful or maybe has the highest ceiling though. I don't know. I think he could turn into something pretty special at Kansas. I'm high on him. He'd be one of my guys in the class is one way that I put it. And so you look at the future room, you now have 2 defensive tackles in the class, assuming that's where they play, Naquane Carter and Smalls Allen, and then defensive end Hunter Higgins and Drayden Punt. So 4 total defensive linemen. I don't know if this will do it for Lance Leipold and KU football in the class of 2026, or maybe, more so be about, are there any late risers or somebody you can find in the fall at this point in time? But if it is, good way to rounding out the class for Lance Leipold. All right, we're going to finish up here on Locked On Jayhawks. We're going to talk a little bit about a little financials and KU K-State, kind of more financial rivalry, so to speak, and a little more latest news. This is Locked on Jayhawks. Thanks for joining us on LOJ, and don't forget you can make it your first listen every day. You can check out Locked on College Football or Locked on College Basketball for your second listen every day as well. We're going to have an episode coming up, 3 new KU football players that are going to determine how good Kansas football is going to be in 2025. We're also going to talk a little episode later this week about Too Big Basketball. Is it coming for KU basketball this upcoming season? All right, a little latest news. This was interesting. This was sent out about new spending data between Kansas and Kansas State, and how Kansas is now number 1 in the Big 12 in total athletic spending, whereas Kansas State has dropped to last place. You look at the Directors' Cup, where that's just like a combination of all your different sports together, where Kansas is a decent size ahead of Kansas State there. You look at, enrollment growth, where Kansas is up about 8%, which actually is on the lower end of the Big 12, but compared to Kansas State, it's down 24%, right? And Kansas, after, maybe going down a little bit or starting to flatten a little bit, is started to go up just a little bit there. I do think maybe there's something to be said about the new stadium, getting students excited. Like there always is a correlation between athletics doing well, football doing well, basketball doing well, and your enrollment going up. And I wonder how much of it is that, how much of that is the new stuff that they're doing. I mean, there's been a lot of money invested to the university as a whole with new buildings and new departments and stuff. But I don't know, just kind of interesting to see where they're at. And as we continue to work in a lens of what's going to happen, what's the future of college sports? Are we eventually going to split off? Are the Big Ten or SEC going to add more schools down the line if one adds and the others looking to respond? And you're always just looking to position yourself in the best possible light and get the edge up on others. And so it certainly doesn't hurt that this stuff is kind of happening for Kansas. Other latest news for KU basketball relates to some of the pickups of the players that were on this past season and where they're going in the NBA. Hunter Dickinson got a 2-way deal with the New Orleans Pelicans. So that's the only guaranteed deal. So he will basically be in and out of the G League and NBA lineup. And then a couple summer league additions, as DeJuan Harris will be with the Hornets and Zeke Mayo will be with the Wizards. Obviously, the most interesting of those is the Hunter Dickinson 2-way deal. We'll see if he's able to have himself an NBA career. I know he was never really popping up on draft boards, but there still are even, the old school center where maybe they're not, the most proficient defensively or getting out in space, like Nikola Vucevic or Jonas Valanciunas that are in there. Those guys are strong, physical. They're double-double machines. That describes Hunter. Those guys, though, are still knockdown shooters, at least in the case of like Vucevic, that they can go out. So that'll be a big swing skill for Hunter to see if he can carve out any sort of an NBA career. Otherwise, he'll probably make a lot of money playing overseas and in Europe. With DeJuan and Zeke Mayo, maybe Zeke can hit a bunch of shots in Vegas and Summer League, and we'll see how that goes. What I think will be interesting, so I think Summer League is like July 10th through the 20th. I think the TBT, the basketball tournament where KU's putting together that team, is like July 19th or something is the first game. I do wonder, could KU add any reinforcements? Like, let's say DeJuan Harris or Zeke Mayo don't get a, Exhibit 10 contract or a 2-way contract or some sort of contract with their teams after playing Summer League, and they're just looking for available opportunities. That'd be a pretty cool opportunity to go play in that event if they could. I don't know. We'll see if that happens, because that roster still needs some more guards. So I guess I'm on the lookout for that. I don't know if that is a possibility or not. All right. That'll do it for this episode of Locked on Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe to the show. See you next time.